May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our strength and our Redeemer, and inspire in us greater faith and faithfulness. Today I want to think with you about the importance of being there, not in the sense of where you or I should be at any given time, like showing up for work when you're supposed to, but about how, the way, the manner in which we are present at any time or place, about the impact we can make if we are paying attention to the people and the place in which we are present, rather than being caught up in, as one person put it, the tedious prison of preoccupation with ourselves. Paul and Silas found themselves in a different kind of prison. As you heard, after Paul cast a demon out of a slave who was ironically following them around, calling out, "These men are slaves of the Most High God, who proclaim to you the way of salvation," her owner had Paul and Silas arrested, beaten, and imprisoned because he could no longer make money from her supposed gift. I say supposed because it was no gift to her. The demon who possessed her controlled her, and her owner profited from it, and it robbed her of any personal freedom or autonomy. So Paul and Simon found themselves put away in the most secure part of the jail with their feet locked in stocks, a pretty miserable circumstance. But as they sang and prayed aloud and the other prisoners listened, there came that earthquake that broke everyone free. Now, if you or I had been beaten and imprisoned in a foreign country, because they were in Macedonia, not Judea, on some bogus charge with no clear idea what was going to happen to them, and the opportunity to walk or run away came, well, I bet we'd take it. But not Paul or Silas. They recognized that what looked like a great stroke of luck for them, or a miracle on God's part, was actually a serious threat to someone else involved, the jailer. He worked for the Romans who governed the area. And things were a little different back then under Roman rules. There was absolutely no acceptable excuse for losing custody of your prisoners, not even an earthquake. The consequence would not be losing his job, but something much more dire. It would be death, and not necessarily an easy one. So the jailer decided he was going to take things in his own hand and make it a quick death. But when Paul and Silas assured him that they were there, he was extremely grateful and also, I suspect, surprised. And he recognized something in them, in what he had heard them singing and praying about, what they had done for him by not running. Well, it was so amazing that he and his whole household became believers. Paul and Silas recognized in their opportunity to escape, to do something for themselves, a greater opportunity, an opportunity to witness to someone about Jesus and the kind of love Jesus calls us to. When I read this story, I often think about two people, John McCain and Nelson Mandela. Not together, they were at different places, but both of whom were imprisoned, and both of whom made the decision to consider those around themselves as important as themselves in their situation. John McCain's father and grandfather were Navy admirals. Some of you will remember him as a U.S. Senator and presidential candidate. As a young man, he followed in his father's footsteps, attending the U.S. Navy Academy and becoming a naval aviator. He was severely injured when his plane was shot down during the Vietnam War, and he was captured by the Viet Cong, who imprisoned and tortured him. When they realized who he was, they gave him minimal medical care, keeping him alive because of his relationship to an important person. He was a valuable prisoner. When his father was named commander of the U.S. forces in Vietnam, the North Vietnamese offered McCain early release because they wanted to show how merciful they were for propaganda purposes, and also to show the other POWs that those officers, those elite prisoners, could not be counted on. They would take preferential treatment, and that would further demoralize them. So McCain refused early release. He refused release unless every man taken prisoner before him was also released. So he ended up spending 5.5 years as a prisoner of war, enduring torture the whole time, especially after he foiled the Viet Cong's little propaganda plan. McCain chose to stay there for the sake of his fellow prisoners and for the good of our country. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison because of his efforts to end apartheid. Apartheid being a system of extreme racial discrimination adopted in that country in 1948, which gave minority European colonizers control of 80% of the country, 80% of the land, forcing non-white people into ghettos, allowing them only minimal education and minimum wage jobs, and restricting their political participation. Opposition to apartheid was vigorously, sometimes violently, suppressed. 18 of his 27 years in prison were spent at the prison on Robben Island, which housed mostly political prisoners. And he had no way to escape there. It was 5 miles out in the ocean. There, every attempt was made to dehumanize and demoralize the prisoners. They were forced to sit out in the prison yard and break boulders into gravel using little hammers. They were sometimes physically assaulted by the guards, even tortured. Mandela was kept in solitary confinement much of the time and allowed only one visit and one letter every 6 months. In spite of the abuse and deprivation, Mandela chose not to return hate for hate. Crystal Brand was just 19 when he was assigned as Mandela's guard. Mandela's consistent treatment of him as a person, not as an enemy, resulted in the black political prisoner and the white Afrikaans guard forging an unlikely and enduring friendship. Brand grew to like Mandela and sometimes smuggled in little treats like bread or books for Mandela to read. One time he even sneaked in Mandela's infant granddaughter so that Mandela could hold her. Must have been on one of those 6-month visitation days. And Mandela, for his part, encouraged Brand to continue his education, and even after his release from prison in 1990, maintained an interest in Brand and his family. Apartheid ended officially in 1994, and Mandela was elected president of South Africa. But his friendship with Brand continued, and Mandela publicly acknowledged him. "This was my jailer and my friend," he said, in front of Parliament. And Brand would bring his family to visit Mandela. Needless to say, Brand's view of apartheid was completely changed through this relationship, and he became an advocate for peace and racial reconciliation. Well, you and I are not in prison, which is good news, and I hope we never will be. The additional good news is that our presence, our attention to the people and world around us can make a real difference wherever we are, and no matter how young or old we are. You saw the video that I showed earlier. As I said, it's somehow, those videos started popping up on my Facebook feed, and I'm pleased because they're very, very uplifting. But I want to say a few things about this particular one. It was clear from that video, you saw the pictures of the playground. It was a nice playground. You saw the pictures of the interior of the school. It was a nice school, probably fairly new. It even had a ramp for wheelchairs inside the school. And the playground equipment, you saw pictures of that. It was impressive. I mean, not many schools have playground equipment like that. But somehow the people who designed that playground completely ignored the fact that there were kids who would be using that wheelchair ramp in the school who would have nothing on the playground for them. It took a class of 5th graders to challenge that omission. And I'm sure the whole class didn't one day just have a sudden epiphany, like, oh, wait. Probably 1 or 2 of the kids started thinking about it and then talking about it with others, and their concern and awareness grew. Well, and that's how visions start. And being of kids, of course, they did need some adult help once they decided they were going to raise the money. Their teacher, and I'm sure some others, provided it, but the vision was theirs. They were the ones that saw their fellow students in wheelchairs sitting on the sidelines during recess and decided that was wrong. So they worked long and hard to change it. They hadn't learned a lesson that too many of us, far too many of us, pick up over our lifetime, in which we come to believe that big things are not possible, not realistic. So they just went for it. And the video further sort of hinted at, in some of the things people said, that the whole school, as well, obviously, as the community got involved. And they accomplished their goal. But they didn't just sit back and celebrate and congratulate themselves. They expanded their goal in order to do the same thing for other schools in the district. I saw your faces while you were watching it. Wow, what a difference. What a powerful message that we can take from those kids about the ways of being aware of the needs of others around us can lead us to make a difference, regardless of age. But it doesn't always have to be something as huge as that will end up on the road with Steve Hartman. Little things matter just as much. We don't need to undertake impressive things, although we shouldn't shy away from that. But the things that we do that will make a difference are not necessarily things that will stand out like that. Consider Laura Widman and her next-door neighbor. Laura Widman was a member of the congregation I served in McGregor, Iowa. She was in her 80s when I was there. She did not have any family living in the area. Neither did her next-door neighbor, also in her 80s. But they did have kitchen windows that faced each other. You could see into each other's kitchen. So they developed a little ritual. They gave each other keys to the houses, and each night before they went to bed, they would pull down the shade in that window in the kitchen. And if that shade was not up before a certain time in the morning, the other person would call them to check on them. And if they didn't answer the phone, they'd take that key and go over and go in the house and check on them. Well, years went by of their carrying out this ritual with nothing happening. But then, one day, Laura, when she got up in the morning and went in the bathroom, she fell and broke her hip, or as sometimes is the case, her hip gave way and then she fell. She didn't put the shade up, she didn't answer the phone. Her neighbor came and checked, and because she got early help, she was able to have surgery and make a good recovery. but for years they had engaged in that ritual of being present for each other. Jesus prayed not only for his disciples, but for those who would come to believe because of their witness. Paul says, we are to be ambassadors for Christ, those people whose actions and words will point others to Jesus. So I encourage you to think and pray about two things. First, in what situations and in what ways is God calling you to be present in a way that makes a positive difference? Second, in what situation and in what ways is God calling us as a congregation to be present in ways that make a difference? Whether the answers come back as big things or small things, we will be blessed as well as blessings. Amen. So let us sing together the hymn, "We Are Called to Be God's People."